Greetings from Capacity Media and from NTT. I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest Capacity Media webinar. And the theme of today's presentation is how to keep your network safe from DDoS attacks. And Darren Grabowski is going to be giving a practical guide. Are you ready to respond to a DDoS attack? It's a big issue at the moment with botnets. Do you have a defense plan in place? They can strike at any time, as Darren will be telling us in a second. So, Darren, you are Manager of Network Security at NTT's Global IT Network.
Yep.
Say hello, say who you are, and then let's proceed to this talk. If you want to ask questions, by the way, you see on your screen, there is a button at the bottom where you can type in questions. You're totally anonymous. I will read them out to Darren. But you can ask whatever you want in confidence, and we hope to have a lively discussion at the end of the presentation from Darren. So Darren, go on and let's hear from you.
All right, thanks, Alan. Hey, welcome everybody to the talk today. Coming from you from chilly Texas. It's 0 here Celsius, about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. But I'm excited to talk to you about DDoS today. So
that's very cold for Texas. Wow.
It is very cold for Texas. But thanks, everybody, for joining, taking your time out of your day. I really appreciate it. So let's just jump right into this and begin the talk. So yeah, this is just a quick talk on how to keep your network safe from DDoS attacks. I hope it's a practical guide. It's kind of higher level. Obviously, the details really just depend on you and your individual networks. Let's kick it off by talking about what we call the DDoS threatscape. The DDoS threatscape, what is it? Well, it's just what's going on with DDoS. And what we're really seeing kind of industry-wide when I talk to my peers and my vendors and things like that, it's just the rise of the botnet. You know, botnets, they were kind of a big deal a few years ago, and then they kind of went, they didn't really go away, but they just kind of weren't really the focus of our attention. We started seeing all these DNS reflection amplification attacks, USSDP, and all those sorts of attacks. But over the past, really the year, we've started to see botnets come back. And this is a really interesting graph from NetScout Arbor's latest report for the first half of 2022. And it just shows the probing, what they've seen compared to 2021. As you can see, there was, some higher probing, and then it kind of shifted a little bit towards April, May. But then in June, they started seeing a huge increase in probes. I mean, it's like over double from what they saw the previous year. And this is kind of interesting because we're seeing this shift of DDoS going away from traditional spoofed attacks to these botnet attacks. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I had a chance to go to an event down in Orlando, Florida with Nokia, and their Deep Field CEO, Craig Labowitz, had a really interesting talk about botnets and just how they're coming up and some very unlikely adversaries in the botnet world. We're seeing devices like DVRs become compromised, IP cameras, home routers, thermostats, things like that. One really interesting device that they found was compromised and part of a botnet was a parking meter. And unfortunately, I don't remember which country it was in, but it was every parking meter in this country was compromised and was part of a botnet and participating in DDoS. And so as these parking meters were still doing their job of, taking payments for parking and things like that, they were also participating in DDoS attacks. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting because that goes against the narrative of what we've seen as a security industry for so long. Typically botnets were home computers that were compromised or servers that were compromised. And now we're starting to see this shift away from that towards things like DVRs, parking meters, home routers, IP cameras, thermostats. It could be components inside of a refrigerator. There's connected ovens and microwaves and toaster ovens. So basically all these IoT devices, which we have billions of them on the internet now, have the chance to become compromised and become part of these botnets. So like I said, it's not so much computers and servers. Those are definitely still being used and compromised because they're typically better connected. They have better resources and can generate larger attacks. But there's really a shift away from that and going more towards these IoT devices. And why does it matter? Well, in the same talk from Nokia, they showed this graph that is really quite telling. The botnet DDoS attacks are on the rise, and the spoof DDoS again, your DNS, your SSDP, NTP, things like that have remained flat. And the botnet attacks are really interesting because they're very well crafted attacks. They look like legitimate traffic. So when you have, let's say it's against port 80 or 443, and you're looking at the payload, typically we could see inside the payload, oh, it's using, a certain protocol or something has been compromised and that shows up in there. Well, with these botnet attacks, that's not the case. It all looks like legitimate traffic. And so it starts to fool your intelligent filtering. Because if it's let's say it's a TCP SYN attack, well, those SYN packets, they're responding to them as they normally would. And so they complete that three-way handshake. So they get authenticated and they get passed by mitigation devices. And so, same thing with like the SYN ACK attacks as well. It all looks legitimate. Even when you look at the like I said, you look at the payload, it looks legitimate. So really what the mitigation strategy has turned into is what provider can identify these botnets and block them from ever even, reaching your customers. And that's become part of the mitigation strategy, is adding in these huge filter lists of botnets to block the attacks. And if you look at global DDoS trends, Arbor in their report showed that there was actually a small decrease, about 2% over the first from the second half of 2021 to the first half of 2022 in attacks. I mean, we're still looking at over 6 million attacks, so a 2% decrease isn't really that much. But what's really interesting to me is the bandwidth. They've seen an increase of it, but we're actually, in our own data, we're seeing a decrease in the size of attacks. There are still the huge attacks. There's been terabit attacks. There's been huge attacks with, requests per second or high, packets per second. But these huge terabit attacks that everybody fears really hasn't been an issue. And from our own data, we even see much smaller attacks. So I would say ours trends differently than this, but Arbor looks at everybody, all the participants, so from all different providers and things like that, whereas, we're kind of just focused on our network. But it's still an interesting point. And of course,
Gavin, can I just interrupt a minute? It's Alan here. There's a really basic question, which is maybe good to answer right at the top here. Somebody says, what exactly is a botnet? Can you explain what a botnet is?
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess, you and I use the terms all the time, but a lot of people who are probably going to be your customers who just want to know that basic.
So a botnet is essentially a group of computers that are being controlled by what we call a command and control server. You'll see it referred to as maybe a C2 server. But basically, you have a command and control server that is sitting out somewhere on the internet, and all these devices that are compromised have software inserted into them that will communicate with the command and control server. And so hackers have gotten smarter. They've encrypted the traffic between the bots and the C2s or the command and control servers. But these botnets are basically just a group of computers that are controlled by either one or multiple command and control servers to launch attacks. So you can kind of think of it as really a cloud system in a way. They're just a lot more highly distributed, and maybe less clusters in certain areas. But that's essentially what his botnet is. Hopefully that explains it for you. If not, you can ask again. Ask for clarification. Be happy to dive into a little bit deeper. But let's get back to these headlines. I think sometimes, media, no offense to my friends here at Capacity, will write headlines that, want to grab attention and let people dive into those articles. So like, government technology, hacktivism and DDoS attacks rise dramatically in 2022. I don't really see that data. I wouldn't say it's a dramatic rise. We've actually seen some decreases, throughout the year. But it ebbs and flows, and it depends, I guess, on your customers and things like that. Maybe some markets are seeing an increase. You have the Ukraine war that drove DDoS attacks towards them in their regions as they shifted traffic to different areas for their own protections. You saw attacks kind of follow that, and so where you'd see attacks in one region, it moved to a different region. Even inside of Europe, we've seen that. Where it moved from, I can't remember which country they're really seeing a high number of attacks in, but it moved to Ireland. So that was really interesting. But really, what are attackers trying to do? Well, they're either trying to disrupt flow of money, or maybe it's a hacktivism thing, like with the Ukraine war, they've chosen sides. or maybe they're just trying to steal your joy. Sporting events. I know that there's some huge things coming up for football, the European football coming up, and there's going to be attacks against those streams and those people that are providing access to those games, because people just are, lack of a better term, they're jerks. They want to steal our joy. And so, we're going to be seeing a lot of that, I think, as we increase, as we get into the shopping season. Here in the US, we have Thanksgiving this week. Coming up next week, we have the big Black Friday sales that are going to happen. Probably seeing the advertisements for those. We're kicking off the Christmas shopping season. And so you're going to start seeing attackers increase their attacks against the e-commerce sites. To try and just disrupt the flow of commerce and stop those things from happening. So it's definitely that season for us, heightened alerts. And so very timely for this talk. So look at some NTT data. This is our high alert trend. And this is where I say that, dramatically in 2022, we really haven't seen an increase. We actually saw this decrease starting in January. And then we had this kind of a low point. And then it picked back up again in August and dropped a little bit in September, but it's starting to increase again. And I anticipate that we're going to continue to see these increases. Now, high alerts for us just mean these are what we have very high confidence in being a DDoS attack. It means that going towards either an individual host or a profile look at overall traffic towards a customer, it triggered a high alert that we would actually mitigate on. Some of these things could be like a flash crowd, but most of these attacks with high confidence, they're actually DDoS attacks. And then the mitigation duration. This slide to me is always very important to talk about, because if you look at that dark blue, 68% of the attacks that we see, the duration of those attacks are 5 minutes or under. And if I was to look at that granular data, I'd probably say they're like most of them are in the 2 to 3 minute range. And this is important because if you're relying on your SOC or your NOC to watch for these things and to mitigate these attacks, there's a good chance that the attack's going to end before they actually get anything in place. And so we really have to rely on auto mitigation to start these mitigations to defeat these attacks. Because if you factor in the 5 to 15 minutes, you're looking at 82% of attacks are happening under 15 minutes. And even then, I think that's your humans are going to be a little too slow. We had a customer a few years ago that came under attack, and they switched over to our DPS Max service to do auto mitigations because they found that the fastest that they could respond was 30 minutes. That was the best that their NOC could do. But once they got to us, we could start a mitigation in under a minute. So it was very fast for us to get it once we had the data to start it. Auto mitigation's even faster because we're going to detect those attacks. But that's what we're going to. That's the trend we're heading towards. And a lot of these also have to do with the kinds of attacks that we're seeing. Carpet bombs have been very popular over the past, I'd say probably a year, they've really started to increase. And a carpet bomb attack is simply where instead of going after a single host, attackers are going after multiple hosts. So it could be an entire /24, which is 256 IP addresses. Or they'll do a /23, double that, 512 IP addresses. And they're not attacking every one at the same time. They'll start attacking one IP with a small amount of traffic for a short duration, maybe 2-3 minutes, and then they move to the next IP and the next one. And they start to stack. And as they stack, that traffic increases. Well, if you look at your attack detection on a host base, just looking at a single host and the amount of traffic, it'll never trigger. But if you look at it more as a profile, where you look at all the traffic, then you can start seeing these alerts trigger because you're looking at the traffic overall. You're not looking, like I said, at individual hosts. So these carpet bombs have become very popular. They're difficult to detect. They can be difficult to mitigate if your system isn't set up to handle it. So you really can't mitigate like an individual IP. You need to start mitigating the entire /24 or /23 and just route all that traffic through there to really defeat it, because they don't even go sequentially in their attacks. They'll randomize the IPs. So, they don't make it easy for us to try to find these and mitigate them. So it's definitely something that has been much much harder to deal with. But we've got systems in place to deal with them. And as the vendors, these become more prevalent, the vendors are increasing the defenses against these carpet bomb attacks. And the carpet bomb attacks can also be from botnets. They can be reflection amplification style attacks. So they don't use just one attack vector. They use multiple attack vectors in these attacks. So we talked about DDoS. We know, we understand what the problem is with DDoS. Let's talk about some mitigation strategies. So we have some basic approaches to mitigation. The very first one is black hole. Black hole traffic, we call it the remote trigger black hole. If you're doing BGP with the provider, you can definitely use this. It's fast. It's as fast as BGP takes to converge across the network. It's very effective. It blocks all the traffic to the network, not just to, not just the bad traffic. It does block all the traffic, but it's quick to deploy. It does require advanced setup with your provider, so make sure that you've set this up. And it's really, we call the scorched earth response, unless you take advantage of something like NTT's selective black hole capabilities that can lessen the impact of the attack. And I'll talk about that here in just a second. And yes, I see a comment that yes, it is time enough to overload a TCP stateful device like a firewall. These carpet bomb attacks we've seen have actually made our customer firewalls fall over. So the detection part, we need to work on detecting these attacks a lot faster, because even 30 seconds is enough to make a firewall fall over. But anyway, let's get back to mitigation strategies. So the second approach is filters, or an ACL if you're a Cisco shop. Blocking traffic view filters, it's an all or nothing scenario. There's no intelligence behind the filters other than what we as humans decide to filter. Certain types of TCP and UDP traffic can be difficult to filter on a large scale. You can do packet sizes with these filters. So maybe you're thinking, oh, I can, block certain TCP send packet sizes for that. Well, you might have legitimate traffic that you're blocking, so you can't do that. UDP traffic, you see a lot of DNS reflection amplification attacks. Well, you can't really block DNS, right? So you have to let that through. So that requires some intelligent filtering. So it's very difficult to do it on a large scale. Or maybe your customers don't use your resolvers. So you can't just block traffic, to your resolvers. They want to have external access, or NTP, and so many things out there that customers rely on. And of course, the filters will block traffic, but again, it can block legitimate traffic. They can be deployed ahead of time or deployed very quickly on the network. But they're very effective for blocking traffic that you never intend to reach your network. If all you ever care about going to a group of servers is, TCP 40 and TCP 443, HTTP and HTTPS traffic, then block everything else to it. There's no harm in that. As long as you can access it internally in your network or through some out of band, do that. It's a great way to eliminate DDoS. It drives the attackers to use a specific type of attack to try and, bring you down. So the next approach is just this intelligent mitigation, your third-party DDoS protection service. That'll scrub or clean the traffic. It has the flexibility to intelligently drop bad traffic while allowing that clean traffic to pass. It'll do the deep packet inspections. It can, do regular expressions on traffic. You can scrub out, even like DNS, you can scrub out those domain names that attackers use to get the huge reflections. There's some government sites that are very popular, but you can scrub out all those individual ones and keep the other traffic going. The only exception to this is encrypted traffic. Now, it is possible for companies to scrub encrypted traffic, but it requires a special device, and it would require for you to hand over your private keys. I would never hand over my private keys as a security person, so I don't ever see this being something that I would personally take part in. No NDA in the world is going to get me to change my mind on that. But if that's something that you're willing to do and take that risk, by all means, it's possible. But I find that not too many providers offer this because, like I said, it does require specialized equipment. So that's another a cost for them, and it requires you to give up those keys. And then these intelligent mitigations can also do auto mitigation, which is for very quick response. Based on our test using just NetFlow data, we can detect and start a mitigation as little as 30 seconds. And that's just all based on flow data. There's ways to increase these responses. You can, tap the traffic and have it siphoned off to your DDoS detection devices. And so you can kind of you can do it a little bit faster. We haven't reached that point yet just because of network hierarchies and things that it takes to put those in place. But 30 seconds isn't too bad. Yes, your firewall will still fall over. I know that's still a problem for many of our customers. It's a challenge. I think but that's a challenge across the board that everybody faces. So, if you really require an always on service, there are people that offer that. And by all means, I take, urge you take advantage of that. Do what's going to be best to protect your network. And so let's go on to what I would call the advanced DDoS mitigation, the layered approach. If you look at your home, when you secure your home, when you leave for the day, I hope you don't just lock the lock on your doorknob. Like I hope that you're locking a deadbolt. Maybe when you're home at night, you have a safety chain or an extra latch or something to help protect your doors. Maybe you put in longer screws into your doors so you can't just kick a door open easier. Maybe you have an alarm system. Maybe you have cameras to deter thieves. Maybe just a sign saying, hey, my house is monitored by this security company. All these things are deterrents, and it's a layered approach to protecting your home. Network, defense is the same way. You can combine all these mitigation approaches into one. So you can use entity selective black hole service to drop traffic from regions you don't want to receive traffic. Our selective black hole service allows you to black hole traffic outside of a country, outside of a region. If you're based in the UK and you only ship and sell to the UK and you don't care about the rest of the world, you could black hole all the traffic outside of the UK. You can use those filters to block applications you don't use. So let's say you're going to sell just in Europe. And so you've blocked traffic outside of anywhere but Europe. Well, now you can also defend yourself from those attackers within Europe by putting in those filters, and you block those common attack vectors, that traffic that you don't need on your network. Maybe you've set it up so you only allow your provider's DNS and NTP server traffic into your network. And then you have your third-party DDoS mitigation. You've done all these things, but you're getting hit with an HTTP attack, and they're doing a poster, attack against one of your search engines or something like that, or maybe it's some GET attacks against a certain site. Then you can bring in that intelligent filtering and start filtering it out. And it's really that layered approach that you want to take. There's not I would say that each one of those is good on its own, but together they're great. And that's what you really want to go for, is great when you're DDoS mitigation. And the other thing is we can't forget about the people. You need to develop a team for this. You need to have a team of people that can respond to these incidents as fast as they can. Use checklists or playbooks to respond. One of the best industries I think we can look at when it comes to this sort of stuff is the airline industry. And if you look at pilots, before they take off, before they do anything, they pull out their checklist and they go through the checklist. Even if it's the same task that they're doing day after day and they can do it in their sleep, they still follow these checklists. Why? Because they're humans and humans make mistakes. But when they follow the checklist and they have somebody that's also double checking their work, they can say, okay, yeah, we're ready to fly. Or if a problem happens and it's something that, they train for, but they don't see it all the time. So you can train for it all the time, but if you don't see it all the time, you're going to kind of forget how that, that knowledge that you've come in, we call it skill rot. So again, you still have checklists for that. So, get your checklist, run through them, know who to contact and how to contact them. Are you going to pick up the phone? You can use a dedicated portal like with NTT or DDoS protection service customers get a dedicated portal that when they request a mitigation and they ask for help, it actually pages the on-call security engineer. So even if we're sitting at our desks, we still get paged, and that on-call person gets paged and we know, hey, we got to respond right away. And of course there's email, but if you're under attack, why would you send email? We have a question that came in. It says, how do you manage to automate mitigations in less than a minute, keeping a low level of false positives? Do you use an always on deployment or out of path? Both. You can do an always on deployment where you're essentially running your traffic through there constantly. And when it picks up those attack signatures, it'll immediately start filtering it. Or you can just basically put like a tap in and run it out of path. So you separate your traffic out and you do basically the same thing. But your production traffic stays on task, and then you have this other, the traffic that you split off is looking at it, and it's almost like an always on thing. You can run it through the same kind of devices, or you can use it through some sort of intelligent, detection, whatever your software might look like. But you can kind of do it both ways. So So let's get back to the team really fast. You've got your checklist written. You've got your playbooks. You've got everything in there. Okay, we're going to hit the NTT DPS portal, or we're going to call the knock. Train and test your team. Ask your ISP if you can war game with them. We are happy to do that. In fact, it's kind of fun sometimes. You get to know your customers this way. You can come up with fun scenarios. But you can do it in a relaxed way, but it's still training your team. You let them know that it's real, but on the back end, have a little bit of fun with it. But regularly test your team so you're not caught off guard. Got another question came in. We've used ACLs in the past to drop DDoS traffic, but often find packet fragmentation means these are not as effective as we would like. Any tips on dealing with fragments? If you don't see fragments on a regular basis, block it. That's the biggest thing with these reflection amplification attacks is, the biggest amount of traffic that you see come in are fragments. It's not the actual 53, traffic that you're going to see. It's fragments. So if you don't see fragments on a regular basis, if your network's pretty clean in that case, then just drop them. But during a DDoS, you can just ask your provider to add that in if you can't drop fragments all the time. I know that fragmented traffic is just the nature of the beast on the internet. So it depends on your individual networks, but yeah, fragments. Yeah, that's a great question and a great point too. Fragments are the biggest part of these attacks that we see. All right, so you guys have got your checklist ready, right? You got your team ready to go. You've war gamed with your ISP. You've tested them. Everybody's ready to go. Let's talk about some DDoS protection services, and specifically, let's talk about NTTs. We couldn't do this without having a little bit of an infomercial. So NTT, we have our black hole service. So it's a global service that will drop across the entire network. You can use our selective black hole service, fine tune those black hole announcements. This is free. Any NTT customer can sign up for this. The only requirement is that you speak BGP with us, and it does require to be set up in advance. But our customer engineers are happy to do that. You can reach out to our NOC. They're happy to do that. Heck, you contact us. We're nice guys at the security team. We'll even set it up for you. But really the biggest thing that we have, I think is most important, is our DDoS protection service. It is based on NetScout Arbor's TMS HT1000s. We use those for mitigation. We use their Sightline product for DDoS detection. We have 13 locations on 4 different continents. So our strategy isn't we're going to backhaul all your traffic to one scrubbing center in one region. No, we want to put scrubbers and have it and clean the traffic as close as we can to the attack source. So in Asia, we're in Hong Kong, Singapore, Sydney, which is a new location for 2022, and Tokyo. In Europe, we're in Amsterdam, Frankfurt, and London is a new location for 2022. North America, we're in Ashburn, New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and San Jose. And in South America, we're in Sao Paulo. And we've upgraded capacity in all these locations this year. We've moved them from bundled 10 gig links to 100 gig links, so we can get the best performance that we can out of these devices. But yeah, that's, I've heard of some providers that have built these huge scrubbing centers, but they're backhauling all that traffic there. So, it maybe their scrubbing center is located on the West Coast and the attack comes in on the East Coast and they backhaul it all the way over there. That's silly. We're going to clean it as close as we can to where it comes into our network. And then we're going to send it back to you using the same BGP routes that we've learned from your interfaces. So we don't send it down a GRE tunnel. We are now injecting it right back into the routing table using a VRF, and then it routes to wherever you want it to go. So it looks the same for you as it did, during normal traffic situation. And it gives you that control as well to be able to move your traffic around. Let's say you have a center that's still maybe a little, it's overwhelmed. Maybe a lot of traffic's coming in from Europe, and so you're seeing that a lot of that traffic going there that you wouldn't normally see. Well, you can, turn that one down and let it go to the other places, but it gives you that control, to move those around as you need. So we have 4 levels of DDoS protection services. Our very base level is we call it DPS control. That's just a permanent ACL. You pay for an ACL, you tell us what you want. It's like 50 lines on a Cisco, Juniper, or Nokia. It can be different. But we'll craft that ACL with you. We'll make sure that it makes sense. Like if you block all DNS or all fragments, we just say, hey, do you want DNS and fragments? You might need it. And you're like, oh, hey, we do. So, we'll kind of help you out, check it out and stuff, make sure it makes sense. We can even give you like a base of what we would block, things that maybe you would normally see. The next level is DPS core. This gets you access to our Arbor devices for that intelligent scrubbing. It's customer requested mitigation. So you do that via our DPS portal, which again, a DPS portal is great. You hit that help button, request mitigation, boom, the on-call engineer gets paged. Then we have our next level is DPS detect. You get the ACL, you get the requested mitigations, but you also get the ability to start your own mitigations, and you get DDoS detection. So here's a little secret. We're actually looking at your traffic on the for DPS core customers. We're still alerting on that traffic internally, and we see it. With detect, we actually expose that to you as the customer. So you can see that we're getting attacked, and you can go in there and start your own mitigation. And then our top tier product is our DPS Max. This gets you everything that you did before, but it also gives you auto mitigation. And it's great because it's flexible auto mitigation. If you have a set of prefixes that you don't want us to auto mitigate, we can put that into a different profile and not auto mitigate those, but auto mitigate the rest of them. So what are the pros and cons to using FlowSpec to fight DDoS attacks? FlowSpec, it's something we have not implemented in our network. We get a lot of questions from our customers if we're going to implement FlowSpec. And I asked the simple question is, if I give you access to configure my routers, can I have enable on your routers configure yours? Most of that time is no. I don't think FlowSpec is necessarily bad. I think that there's definitely a use case for it. We've seen some issues with vendors and how they generate FlowSpec rules. And you've probably seen in the news over the past year or so, some large networks that had, a huge part of their network go down because some bad FlowSpec rules. So FlowSpec is good, but it requires very special care to use it. So we just haven't made that leap yet. That's not to say we wouldn't. But yeah, I don't know that we would ever expose that to our customers though. Unless we want to trade and, enable, then hey, let's have some fun. So yeah, DPS Max, auto mitigation. We can detect and start attacks as little as 30 seconds. Definitely the best product, I think, to go with. And again, we don't have to auto mitigate everything. We can auto mitigate really whatever you want. All right, so we know DDoS. We know how to detect them. We know how to mitigate them. But there's still an aspect of DDoS that we got to talk about. And that's just to become part of the solution. And I don't mean, hey, start up your own DDoS protection service. I mean, actually solve the problem. Spoofing, even though we're seeing, those reflection amplification attacks kind of decreasing, it's still a problem. We still have work to do. If you look at this chart here, this is the amplification factors for all these different attacks that we see. So obviously, while the attackers are kind of moving away from these, we still have work to do because we still see spoofing happening on the network. And I get together with other providers. We talk about some larger attacks, and then we start tracing back the spoofs and contact those customers. I would love to be able to try and stop it in the in the middle of the network, but we really can't. We got to stop the spoof, and it requires you as our customers, as the edge of the network, to really filter the traffic.
So Darren, if you're panicking at that last 2 slides ago with that list of things and a couple of other links, that one there, don't panic. It is all being recorded. So as soon as this is finished, within about half an hour, you'll be able to watch it on the Capacity Media site for webinars. It'll all be there forever, or for as long as anybody needs. So you'll be able to watch it and send it on to your colleagues as well. And I think NTT are going to have it on their site as well.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and there's always the Google too, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's get back to talk about stop and spoofing. BSP 38, filter at the edge. I cannot implement BSP 38 and strict URPF in the NTT network. It will break routing for most of our customers unless you're single home. If you only buy from NTT, you trust that our network is the best out there because it is. And you only buy from us, great. You know what? Please don't. For the sake of your customers, be multi-homed. I would love it if we could be the only provider in the world, but the truth is we're not. And so we cannot turn these things on. It will break routing. Not all routing is asymmetrical. Some of it is symmetrical. You might have traffic going out one link and only coming in one link. BSP 38 stuff, like, it's going to break stuff like that. So you have to filter it at the edge. You have to get it down to where the traffic actually enters into the network being the internet as a whole, right? If it's your downstream customers, don't allow them to spoof. If you have a server farm, don't allow it to spoof. Put those things on the edge to stop it from happening. Put in tools to track down offenders. NetFlow works great. We use it all the time to track down people. But NetFlow analyzers are expensive. Kentech, Arbor, Deepfield, their stuff's pretty expensive. But are they really though? NFDump and the front-end NFSend are actually distributed under the BSD license. It's not as fancy. It gets the job done, and we use it. We use it pretty much daily to look at just raw NetFlow data. There's a lot of filters. There's a lot of ways you can look at it and configure things, and it's great for tracing back spoofed attacks. That's pretty much the way that I do it because of some limitation from vendors. I find that this is a little tedious, but it gets the job done and it gets the data that I need. And then I can get a sample of it, send it off to the customers and say, hey, please stop spoofing. And then, the other part of being part of the solution is just look at the protocols that are using the attacks. Do you run any of those services? Are you a DNS, do you have DNS servers that don't need to be recursive to the entire world? Please turn it off. Do you run NTP servers that don't need to do NTP for the world? Please turn it off. Keep it only internal to your own network. Lock those things down. But really look at your traffic and think about what are you doing or going to do to help stop these attacks from happening. And I think it's the biggest thing is just, like, oh, I've never been DDoS. It's easy to say I've never been DDoS. I'm not really, don't need to worry about it. But chances are your network might have been actually used in the attack. And it's always interesting to me when I look through, flow data and I see an NTT IP in there. It's kind of like, oh, like we're still part of the problem. In some cases, like our DNS servers are used in DNS reflection amplification attacks, but also we have them open to everybody, and we can't really lock them down. So we've put in the protections that we can there, but we can't just say no recursive for everybody because we don't know who's using them. We could do that, the analytics on that and look to see who is using them. But the fact is to try to lock them down would be impossible. It'd be like asking Google, Quad 8 or Quad 9 or Quad 1, all those guys to do the same thing. It's just not going to happen. So the other solution, patch everything, your servers, your IoT devices, your phones, your iPads, your computers, your Androids, the list goes on and on and on. Patch your devices. If you were to turn up and just a brand new Windows computer without any patches on it, it'd probably be compromised within seconds and it already had malware on there. So you got to make sure that you change those passwords. Change default passwords. Manufacturers, if you're manufacturing IoT devices, do this for internal components. Those IoT devices that we talked about earlier, those parking meters, those DVRs, most of the time, these devices aren't compromised by the software that they're running. They're compromised because of the internal devices have like a default password from the manufacturer that doesn't get changed. And so when you buy the same, let's say it's a camera, if you're buying the same camera that this company's buying for their camera and this company's buying for, for their device that has a camera built in and this company buys, but you all buy the same device and you're all using the same default password, guess what? If you don't change it, that's just become part of a botnet. And a lot of times it takes researchers a little bit of time to figure out why. Like, oh, this is interesting. You have this company's device and this company all part of the same botnet. Okay, what kind of shared components do they have? And you have to kind of look at the internals of that. So do your due diligence and don't trust that the components that you're getting are secure. And secure your IoT devices, put them behind firewalls or filters, isolate them on their own VLAN. A friend of mine just built a beautiful new home here. He bought Ubiquity equipment for his internal network. He came to me and said, what would you do? And I said, I would do this. And then his next question was, how do I isolate my VLAN traffic? And so, or my IoT devices. And so we created VLANs. And we actually have 4 VLANs on his network that we put his IoT devices on. He has actually gaming stuff on a different VLAN. He's got his main VLAN for his just regular traffic. And then he's got a guest network as well. And is it overkill for his house? Probably. Was it fun to do? Absolutely. This helps with skill rot. I do these things, do it in your own home, get stuff that you can play with to build out these things. If you're not doing it all the time, do it at home so you don't lose those skills. And then the last thing is monitor your outbound traffic, not just your inbound. Over the past, 10 plus years, we've seen a lot of companies get compromised and lose intellectual property. Cisco was one of them. They lost router code. Sony, a few years back, if you remember, they got compromised and, movies were stolen from them. I find it hard to believe that there wasn't some kind of increase in outbound traffic that nobody noticed. So look for suspicious patterns. Look at your traffic. Monitor your flows in both directions. Do you see, odd traffic that is going, like a lot of traffic going to port 389 or 1900 or 53 or 123? All UDP based. Start looking at that. Is it coming from an IP address that you own? Oh, it's not? Yeah. Well, guess what? It's been spoofed. Filter that stuff out. But really, you got to pay attention to your outbound just as much as you pay attention to your inbound, because you never know what's going out. And you don't want to be caught up in like these other companies that have lost intellectual property and lose it. And finally, you don't have to take my word for it. We've got a case study with a company called 3W Infra. They're one of our DPS customers. And basically what it comes down to is that signing up for a service like our DDoS protection service gives them peace of mind, knowing that they're not in it alone. They've got somebody who's watching their back, and when they do get attacked, we're gonna filter that attack for them, and we're gonna help them out. So we're really partnering with our customers on this. It's not an us versus them thing. It's a partnership that we really do with our customers. And so, like I said, check it out. We've got the case study on our website. It'll be available for you to see after the talk is over. But yeah, that is all I have. Ready for some questions.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Shall we end the slides, or have you got a final slide? Yes, there's Darren's contacts, which are really important. drg@ntt.net, 9 characters plus an accent. So thank you very much. We've got some questions coming in, and we've still got, if you want to type your questions into the box at the bottom of the screen, then go ahead. I'm assuming you've copied that information about Darren, but as I say, a recording of this will be on our capacitymedia.com website very shortly. It's now nearly 5 o'clock, 4:45 on the 17th of November. Probably by the time we all go home tonight, it'll be up on the site and it'll be there for you all to look at. So let's look at us again. There we are. Got some questions. So with the rise of botnets, is there a push, and you touched on this quite a bit, is there a push from the industry to make these non-user devices more secure by nature, to remove them from the risk of botnets?
Absolutely. There's been a push from the security team from the security community to really get these things more secure. I think the problem is that as we're seeing inflation and we're seeing consumer prices go up on devices. Well, people still want the price to be driven down, and oftentimes, sadly, when it comes to where you're going to spend, where your budget is an item, security often gets cut as one of the first things. My wife does software QA, so she's been laid off a few times as a QA person because they often cut QA, they'll cut security budgets and things like that. And so, if you have a deadline to roll out a product and you have a smaller team because there's been layoffs or whatever it is, you can definitely run into situations where these devices aren't going to get secured. They're not going to get that first pass, and so it comes out in a patch later. Well, what happens with patches? If it's not an automated update, most people aren't going to do it. I live in a nice neighborhood. I can look around at my neighbors, and I can probably tell you, who's would run patches and who wouldn't. I have one friend for sure. I know she wouldn't, because she hasn't even set up her new phone that she got last Christmas. So, it's one of those things where it would be great if they could get it from the beginning, but it's patching. You're not going to find everything from the start. So you got to patch those devices.
You talked about your neighbor, whom you'd helped to set up several networks in their house. Mm-hmm. What have you done in your house in Dallas? What have you got? What sort of security measures do you have?
I do the same thing.
What would you not have in your house?
What would I not have in my house? I love the technology. I've automated things. I've got my Christmas tree somewhere back here is set up. So, when we wake up in the morning, my lights come on, my lights turn off outside, at sunset, lights come on. I love the automation behind all that, but I have isolated these things into VLANs. I have put them separate from everywhere else. I put up filters on my router. I don't use the router that, I'm a Frontier Fios customer, and I don't even have the router in my house. I told them just to keep it and not even drop it off when they install the service. I use my own router, and I do secure things with just basic filtering as it comes in. and isolate those devices and only allow it to talk to certain ports or certain IPs out on the internet. But I'm a security guy, and I know how to do all these things, right? And so it's hard I think it would be hard for just the average person to do it. So it really comes down to, is there a service? If you're really concerned about it, is there a service that you can get? But it also puts a little bit of the onus onto the providers themselves to at least give some basic level of security, and on these manufacturers to give a basic level of security. As much as I'd hate to say, turn on automatic updates, from as the default. That might be needed.
Right. Yeah, quite. Okay, that's good. Do you know who's responsible for these botnets? I mean, is there somebody who worked on the psychology of who these people are and why they're doing it? Why do they want to make it look like legitimate traffic? What's their motivation?
Some of it is state sponsored. Some of it is governments. I don't want to pick on China, but China is one of them. Russia is one of them. The U.S. has participated in stuff.
That graph, how it varied through the year.
Yeah,
and how it went up. There's a war going on in not very far from here.
That's right. Yeah. So a lot of them are state sponsored. A lot of them are doing it for money. One of the things I didn't talk about that I've talked about in the past is just how much it costs to launch DDoS and things like that. And it's pretty cheap, but it's a very lucrative, business too. And then there's the darknet, there's the underground where these miscreants are selling all the, credit card numbers, accounts, usernames, passwords, all these things. And so a lot of times DDoS they're not necessarily, in some cases, DDoS isn't used as a mechanism to cause harm to somebody. They're doing it as a cover up. A few years ago, there was a small company, it was a construction company, and they had the controller's computer was compromised. The attackers had control over it, and they started an ACH transfer of about $900,000 out of their bank account, and then immediately DDoSed the bank.
Right.
So what happens? You see a DDoS coming in, everybody's going, oh, what's going on here? So your attention shifted. Meanwhile, going out the back door is $900,000.
Right. It's like creating a disturbance at the front of the bank while you're walking in the back door.
Yeah. So it's, if you're getting attacked, you have to think about why. And then a lot of the attacks are just they're video games. A new Call of Duty just came out. I know it was like one of my employees said that it was the highest streaming thing on Twitch. Well, let's say you're really, really good at video games and this other guy is not, and he's getting frustrated because you've decided that he's the easiest target and you're just going to pick on him. Well, he's like, okay, for $5, I can launch a 5-minute attack against him. And so he attacks you, you lag, he kills you, he feels better, and you're out of the game. And then he's happy because he can, continue playing the game. And so many of the attacks are just that, just people aren't good at video games, so they launch attacks. So there's a whole bunch of things behind it. It's hacktivism, it's ransom. It's a ransomware kind of, not the ransomware, but it's ransoming people. Hey, I'm going to DDoS if you don't give me 5 Bitcoin or something. Yeah. And so it's just most of it is driven by money, like everything else I think in the world. And so they're criminal like a thief would be.
Yeah, sure. Similar motivations. There's another question come in. Can you read it out for you?
Yeah. Assume Gen monitors outbound with DPS service. We have the capability. We don't typically, we're monitoring attacks towards you. We're not monitoring attacks leaving your network. If we do get alerted that we're seeing something, if one of our customers or one of our peers alerts us that they're seeing something, then we'll go in and take a look at that and trace it back and then get in touch with you. Because it is an AUP violation, and we treat them as such. So, I think most of our customers are great. They work with us. We want to work with you. My team, it might come off as strong worded. We don't mean it to be, but, at the same time, we do have to be good part of the net, be good net citizens for our peers and the other customers out there.
A few more questions. Your alert trends showed a sudden drop from January until August. Was this previous high linked to COVID lockdown? And has there been a general trend of fewer attacks since restrictions have been lifted in most locations globally? I mean, I guess if we were locked down, we were all working from home and we really,
Well, yeah, we saw a lot of attacks during lockdown with students at school. They would attack their
Yeah.
school so you don't have to take a test. For $5, I don't have to take a test. Hey, it's worth it. Uh, and so we did see an increase in attacks, and we also see an increase in attacks when universities in session too. So typically during the summer months, we'll see a kind of DDoS will slow down. And then once school starts back up, we see it increase again because you have a lot of students that are going back to well-connected networks. Maybe they have a little more free time than what mom and dad would let them have. Maybe they don't have a job. They just have to worry about school. So they're playing a lot more games and things like that.
Beer. Yeah. Okay. Is there one market type that is more frequently or more heavily targeted with attacks? I mean, at the end, the target, I guess,
Yeah.
what sort of businesses and operations.
For us, we don't really know a lot of times what the target is. We can kind of guess based on reverse DNS and things like that, or the customers will tell us. But really, there's been, a lot of the targets are financial institutions, gaming. Those have been really high. E-commerce, those are typically the high ones. Governments, everybody loves attack. Everybody loves a good DDoS against the government. So, those are kind of usually your top sectors.
You get a fairly fierce fight back if you attack the FBI or somebody like that.
I wouldn't, that's kind of like poking the hornet's nest. I don't want to, they've got a lot of resources to go after people. So
extradite you and send you to jail for a long, long time.
Yeah, my neighbor, I can, maybe DDoS him because he does whatever. But government, no.
Right. Okay. There's another one here. Why do you think that we've seen a slight fall in DDoS attacks this year? And do you think this trend will continue?
I really don't know why. I think maybe in some cases because we are seeing a change in how attacks are being launched with these carpet bombs. It's possible we're just missing attacks and customers are just absorbing it instead of actually reaching out to us for help. I think that's part of it. And I think too, it ebbs and flows. Maybe there's just not enough going on for people to care about. It's kind of hard to speculate in some cases. So, but we're now in the midst of, it's Christmas. Let's just face it. Sorry for those in the US that love Thanksgiving. It's one day a year. Be thankful every day. But it's really that Christmas shopping season.
We'll go off to Disneyland for a day or two.
Yeah, that's right. But we're really going to start seeing attacks towards e-commerce sites and things like that. And then I anticipate as Christmas Day, there'll probably be attacks against the PlayStation Network or the Xbox Network and things like that too, as people try to disrupt people's fun from playing games. Because sometimes people do it just because they want to see the world burn. There's no other reason.
Yeah, quite. It's like literally like people setting fire to derelict buildings just to see it burn.
That's right. Yeah.
Firefighters come. If we use NTT amongst other transit providers and peers, can we announce a more specific route to NTT so you will attract all traffic?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
we will be happy to take on, all the attack traffic.
Wise lights up there.
Bring it on. Yeah, no, that's actually what we want our customers to do. If you only use NTT for DDoS protection, you've chosen us as your DDoS protection provider. By all means, stop the announcements to your other providers. Single home that /24. Unfortunately, it has to be at least a /24, but single home it for the duration of the attack. We'll clean it and send it back to you. And then when the attack's over, then you can restore normal routing. We are working on some future products as a little bit of a teaser where we'll actually do that for you. And we'll announce that out to the rest of the internet and take the traffic in. There's just some things on that you're going to have to do as a customer to do this. RBKI is one of them. You're going to have to make your ROAs and things like that. And there's just other things, paperwork and stuff like that has to be done. But the capability exists today.
Okay. So, when are you likely to launch that?
I have no idea.
Okay. Can you talk about how GIN DDoS mitigation through DPS options compares and provides advantages over other DDoS services, meaning other ISPs and specific services such as Cloudflare?
Yeah. So when you use a service like Cloudflare, you're going to be essentially sending your traffic off to another network, and you're going to be receiving it back usually via like a GRE tunnel. So if you got MTU issues that are going to come into play because of the GRE overhead, that was why we got rid of the GRE solution on our side. We just have a handful of customers that are still on it because of some router limitations. But we got rid of the GRE thing. So Cloudflare is great. I actually am a Cloudflare customer. I have a website that goes through them. So, I think that it's a great product, and they definitely, if you're looking for an always on solution, that's great. If you don't need it, why would you ship your traffic off to be cleaned and bring it back? When if it comes in NTT, we can keep it in the NTT network, send it to maybe one hop away from where it comes in to be scrubbed, because the scrubber is going to be in the same pop of where it comes in, and it's going to send it back to where you're at. And so that's really the biggest, I think, advantage, is that you're not sending your traffic off net and then bringing it back on via GRE tunnel or something like that. It's all going to stay the same, and you're going to control the routing as well. You don't have to worry about having multiple GRE endpoints and having it set up, and does it go here? Is a GRE tunnel up? It's all going to use just the native routing.
Yep. We've got a couple of minutes left. Good comment here. Botnet's all about money, says someone. It's all about political motivation. So yeah. Probably right there.
Absolutely.
And final question, I think, because we really are running out of time. What's the hardest type of attack to detect or mitigate without giving away any trade secrets? You don't want to drive people to the hard ones.
These botnet attacks and the carpet bombs are really the hardest. It takes a different look at the traffic. So much of DDoS detection is host based. You're looking at traffic going to a single host because that's historically what we've seen. With the carpet bombs, we see it going to multiple hosts on a smaller scale. So you have to kind of look at the overall traffic going towards a network and say, how much of an increase is it over their normal traffic? So you have to have a baseline, and then you have to say, okay, what's the normal, we have a baseline normal traffic. How much over that are we willing to say it's going to be an attack? So you give us some kind of random percentage. And then over that, then you say, okay, that's probably an attack. And then it starts looking at it and saying, oh yes, we're seeing these patterns within this going to these. And so in our case, when we start the mitigation, it'll typically start as we do it as a /25, so we don't announce it to the rest of the internet. And so you'll get a /25 announced out, maybe multiple /25s to cover all the IPs that it's seeing. And so you're essentially mitigating, 23/23/22 worth of IPs. So, thousands of IPs in some cases are all getting routed through these devices to be scrubbed and sent back. So those are definitely the hardest ones to detect, and to mitigate really are these botnet attacks where it looks like legitimate traffic to the layman. And so you have to really rely on your provider that they have a great research team. Like in our case, we rely on Arbor and their ACERT team, that they're going out and finding all the bots, and they're putting them into their botnet list, so we can put that in front of the customer, and protect them.
Great. Well, Darren Grabowski of NTT, Manager of Network Security, it's been really good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Alan.
Lots of food for thought for everybody who's got networks to look after and security problems. And as I say, if you've been watching this, pass on the link to your friends. It's on capacitymedia.com, and then just look for webinars. You'll find it there, and it will be there. I mean, we've got previous ones from NTT from last year, I think. So altogether, this gives you a lot of information about network security. So thank you very much indeed for your time. Enjoy your Thanksgiving break.
Yes.
In Disneyland.
And for all you Star Wars fans and maybe all your Wookiees, happy Life Day. It is Life Day today. So I've got my Life Day coffee mug right here.
Right.
So happy Life Day.
Thank you very much indeed, Dan. Good to talk to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.